welcome to Bloomberg Quint. You're watching the Fineprint. With all the radical liberalisation cheer of India's FDI policy by the government, we thought it fit to examine if foreign investors will join the chorus too. Well, maybe not, because of the conditions that come with the policy. So, on the Fineprint this week, we ask, are conditionalities killing India's FDI policy? In June this year, the government allowed 100% foreign direct investment in the defence sector under the approval route. Concomitantly, it also relaxed the condition for government approval in the case of foreign investment up to 49%. That is, 49% FDI is now under the automatic approval route. Well, at least on paper. Because this policy change came with its own set of conditions. One of these says that an up to 49% investor will need government approval if infusion of fresh funds results in either change or transfer of ownership. Shishir Vedatan, partner at Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, says that this condition defeats the purpose of the automatic route.
This requirement that companies which don't require an industrial license cannot have a change in shareholding pattern on account of foreign investment unless they get an FIPB approval is, to my mind, again, nothing but a compromise. It's very clear that there must have been departments within the government that were never in favor of placing defense on the automatic route. And presumably there were other ministries, like the Ministry of Finance, which has an interest in liberalizing foreign investment. And the compromise that they've struck is that across the defense space, there will be one occasion or another when the government will get a look in on the transaction. So if it's a greenfield project, then the government gets to look in at the stage of granting the industrial license. And if it's a brownfield project, then the government gets a look in on reliance of that condition, which says that if you don't need an industrial license, then, and you've seen the English of it, it's fairly broad. Any kind of foreign investment is bound to trip up that condition.
One way to address this could be that the government may prescribe a lock-in requirement and permit automatic approval after that. Shishir says that this may help industry but not assuage the government's concerns.
The concern that I think your suggestion would address is usually fixed through a lock-in requirement. In the defense sector, there used to be a 3-year lock-in which was actually done away with.
Okay.
If the government is able to bring that degree of precision in thought, where it can conclude that actually their concern is really just with the short-term nature of money, and I don't think that is their concern in the defense sector, but if that is indeed the government's concern, then yes, a lock-in is, as policy reactions go, a tried and tested measure, and perhaps they could deploy that rather than this sort of broad wording which forces every transaction in a brownfield defense company to go to the government.
While the lock-in may work for defense, it's proving to be an impediment in the real estate sector. The 2016 FDI policy continues to permit 100% FDI in built-up infrastructure under the automatic approval route. But the conditionalities have changed. A new condition imposes a lock-in of 3 years on FDI in all under construction projects, and the lock-in is to be calculated with reference to each tranche of the foreign investment. Are you interpreting this to mean that every time a foreign investor exits its investment, the lock-in evergreens itself?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. So you got to be careful at the time of going in because it has an impact of when you want to exit. And so it's quite possible that a project may require cash infusions at multiple stages. And so it's certainly an interpretation issue where the last in date becomes the reference date for the purpose of calculating your 3-year period.
How is that a problem? If I know on day one that I am going to get an exit 3 years later,
so the problem is this, I get your question. If there is a ready built up infrastructure, it's not necessary that that's when you buy into that infrastructure, let's say day 0, let's say you put in $100, there is a possibility that that infrastructure may either require additional capital or there may be some expansion capacity which you decide after doing your planning, etc., and you put in another 50 rupees, say 1 year later, right?
The same foreign investor.
The same foreign investor.
Okay.
So then what happens? Is
That
the
50 rupees gets
so the
calculated.
debate is whether entire 150, the zero date for that is the last date of the 50 rupees going in, and then 3 years,
Right.
or for each tranche it is 3 years. So 3 years from the date of the initial 100 for the first 100, and 3 years from the date of the 50 for the second 50.
Okay.
So this is what needs to be.
Okay, and
clarified.
how are you sort of getting around, if I can use that phrase?
There are some people who are taking a view that each tranche can be tranched out separately as different series of instruments, and therefore that tranche which came out first can actually go out first. It is possible to do that, but so long as you make sure that you have disclosures and your remittance approvals, etc., fully capture that, I think we can do it.
While creative thinking may work for real estate, a condition for the pharma sector may force deal makers to change deal structures. The 2016 FDI policy allows 74% investment in existing pharmaceutical companies, brownfield as it is commonly referred to, under the automatic approval route. Any foreign investment above 74% needs government approval. The policy disallows non-compete clauses and insists that for up to 5 years after the acquisition, the production of essential or NLEM drugs and R&D expenditure be maintained at the highest level achieved in the 3 years prior to the acquisition.
It's both the conditions together that are creating structure difficulties in transactions. For companies in the pharma space that are engaged in different spaces within pharma. So you could be an API manufacturer, you could be a manufacturer of generics, you could be a manufacturer of branded products, you could be a licensed manufacturer for other pharma companies. Across this heterogeneous space called pharma, when you force every company that receives FDI to preserve the highest level of NLEM drugs and the highest level of R&D expenditure in the 3 years preceding the investment, for 5 years, what you do is you make it difficult for foreign investors who may be keen to invest in one, but not all parts of an Indian pharmaceutical company's businesses, to invest in those companies. Why does that happen? It happens because a lot of these overseas corporations actually have much more focused operations than Indian pharmaceutical companies do. Frequently, these companies outside India are themselves bound by non-compete provisions on subspaces of the pharmaceutical industry that they cannot invest in.
So when you say subspaces, you mean generics, APIs,
That is correct.
etc.
That is correct. Okay. That is correct. What this condition does for foreign investors of that kind is, instead of making a straight equity investment in a pharmaceutical corporation in India with diversified operations, they are forced to make a business acquisition from the existing pharma company. That has its own set of tax and other costs, and it's frankly forcing them to do a fundamentally different deal from from economically the most natural transaction that would have served the purposes.
Irrespective of which sort of subdivision, as you put it, you invest in, you are supposed to maintain that level?
That is correct.
Okay.
But if you, after your investment, wanted to hive off a division, because you're not globally allowed to be invested in that space, the policy doesn't make an exception for that. And the hive off would result overnight in the level of manufacture of NLEM drugs going down, which would be a breach of that condition. And the only way you can make that investment then, knowing that immediately after the investment you would hive off a division, is to go to the FIPB for an approval, thus effectively making what should have been an automatic route investment again an approval route investment.
Much has been said about the government's stance, approach and policy in the retail sector. The 2016 FDI policy eased local sourcing norms for foreign brands that qualify as state-of-the-art and with cutting-edge technology. The policy allows up to 49% investment via automatic route, and more than 49% needs government approval. As per the policy, to qualify as a single brand retail manufacturer and the owner of a brand, at least 70% of the products should be manufactured in-house and at least 30% sourcing should be done from Indian manufacturers. Such an Indian brand, says the policy, should be owned and controlled by resident Indian citizens or companies owned by resident Indian citizens.
In the manufacturing space, this is unheard of. Indian manufacturers were always open for 100% FDI on the automatic route. And with this condition in the SBRT space, again, you've just brought about more uncertainty in whether FDI in a straight manufacturer is even allowed up to more than 50%.
Okay, so I'm not going to expect you to take names, but from the business landscape that we currently operate in, how many of these manufacturers are not Indian owned and controlled?
The question, Paiswani, to ask ourselves is how many of the existing Indian owned and controlled manufacturers need foreign capital which they are not able to raise because the dilution would cause their companies to cease being Indian owned or controlled. And I can tell you this is a structuring problem in a lot of transactions now.
Okay, and then they will have to sort of
go to the government,
abide by all the conditions and
correct.
then go to the government for the
That's
approval.
correct. That, again, and thus bringing something that was on the automatic route effectively to the approval route.
Okay, for this condition, say today an Indian manufacturer owns 100%, right? You can still get what, 49% and be Indian owned and controlled and not have to go to the government for approval, right?
Yes. When investors put in money, it's not just the legality of that immediate transaction which is of concern to them. They would want a clear path to exit. They would want to know if there are policy level implications in taking the company public by IPOing the company. If a company's foreign investment is on the brink, they would want to know if enforcing a drag on the promoter in favor of the deepest pockets, which tend to be foreign, is going to be legally enforceable. A condition like that chills foreign investment, not because it calls the immediate legality of the transaction into question, but it just blurs, it just muddies the water for the future.
And I think we'd all agree that no foreign investor would like to play in muddy waters. Besides these new conditions that are now plaguing pharma, retail, real estate and defense sector, some old conditions are now adversely affecting some new sectors. For instance, the foreign owned and controlled test that at one point affected the banking and insurance sector is now affecting asset management companies. So suddenly, funds set up by the likes of HDFC and ICICI that are foreign owned entities will be treated as foreign funds even if they raise money from domestic investors. And that treatment comes with a whole host of restrictions. The point in all of this is, does the government really want a liberalized FDI policy or simply wants to be seen as having one?